our photography session. So I would like to introduce our speaker of the day. So it is now my great honor and privilege to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is a researcher, an academic whose work sits at the intersection of environmental science, urban sustainability, and most relevant to us today, greenhouse gas emissions and carbon management. So technologist Dr. Fong Cheng Sound is a senior lecturer at the Institute for Advanced Studies, University Malaya, and concurrently serves as the head of sustainability at University Malaya's Sustainable Development Center, a role that places him at the forefront of UM's institutional sustainability agenda. He holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science and technology from University Putra Malaysia and completed his PhD in environmental science, specializing in urban ecosystem management at University Malaya in 2021. His research spans urban climate risk, air pollution, climate resilience, and geospatial analytics, and in recent years has expanded significantly into GHG emissions analytics, carbon management, and carbon neutrality transitions. On the ground, Dr. Fong leads and contributes to multiple national and international research projects, including work on urban heat mitigation, centralized GHG emission data systems, and net zero initiatives such as the Lembah Pantai SDG Precinct, which is a living lab that translates research directly into real-world sustainability solutions for campus and community. So what makes Dr. Fong's perspective particularly valuable today for today's session is that he doesn't just study these issues theoretically. He works with real organizational data, navigates real challenges, and builds real systems. That kind of hands-on experience is exactly what we hope you'll take away from today. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to technologist Dr. Fong Cheng Sound.
Right. Very good morning, everyone. Um, and thank you very much for that very warm welcome. Uh, right, so let me share screen. Okay, so I hope my screen is okay. So so today what we are going to achieve is really on understanding what is greenhouse gas reporting, because I think it's very important that at this current time, I mean along this how humans have developed across the anthropogenic timeline, it's important to understand that what or how far have we come, and what is next in the following chapter. So so this is really coming in from a perspective of how we can better understand our impact as an individual, as an organization, and moving forward, how can we do better in terms of capping this impact in a more manageable way, because it's obvious that whatever that is happening around us can be attributed back towards human anthropogenic activities, right? So there are a lot of evidence pointing towards that. So thank you very much, Daniel, for covering. So I don't need to go through this anymore. But if you want to know more about the other projects that I have currently working or some related publications, then you can head over to this link here in my UM Expert, so you can have a macro shot to understand what are the current things that I'm involved in particularly. Okay. So so what we'll be covering today. So first of all, I'll give you a background. So like what Daniel said, it's okay if you are entirely new to this topic. It could also be those that are very senior or veteran in this field as well. So I think it's always the way that I take it, it's always a learning journey, because the way that we do greenhouse gas reporting or quantification might be very different from one setting to another. Because later on, we will also dissect how do we actually do this reporting, right? And also the quantification of it. So you will understand the basic of GHG quantification mainly is actually because of the type of activities that you have, the boundaries that you set, and also multiplying it with the relevant emission factors. So it's not rocket science, I would say, but really the challenges lies into having a very thorough understanding about as an entity, what are your current day-to-day activities and how does that translates into emissions. So that is basically how the GHG reporting works, right? So after giving you a background of understanding what carbon is, and also then we will move into GHG reporting. So we will talk about scopes 1, 2, and 3. So this is according to GHG protocol. So we'll talk more about standards, frameworks, and certification as well later on. Then I will share with you my journey. Hopefully it could inspire you, or it could also give you a glimpse to understand where can you start. Whether is it worth considering to build a career on top of this, right? So we will end the whole session with the Q&A session. It will be a very free flow session. So today's webinar is really a very laid back kind of sharing session. So I hope you can also take away some informations that are worthy for you. So let's dive straight into segment 1 to talk about why carbon counts matter. So I always like to start with this because it's always nice to have visuals to understand, all the features that I'm showing here is not something new. And you might be thinking this might be happening somewhere in the other parts of the world. But let me remind you again that we are actually living in one ecosystem, which is the planet ecosystem, the Earth ecosystem. So whatever happens at one end of the Earth would also eventually affect the other side of the world, right? So when we see things like melting of glaciers, for example, it's although it's happening at the pole, right? It doesn't. You might be thinking it's too far to actually feel the impact of that melting of that ice glacier in the tropical, which is along the equatorial. But things that I'm showing you here are actually things that are actually happening. And I can also share with you from direct observation is that in the past 2 to 3 weeks, I believe we also experience it ourselves, how hot it is. So to give you facts and figures, at one point I see that the air temperature outdoors is actually reaching 40 degrees. 40 degrees, and that's crazy. And you can also see that sometimes the night air temperature is also about 28, 29, or sometimes up to 30 degrees Celsius. So to give you a perspective, about 5 to 10 years ago, daily average is about 28, meaning that we have lower, we have higher, and you minus it, then you get 28. So now nighttime, which we expect it to be the coolest, is around 30 degrees Celsius. So that's how far we have gone, in terms of how the climate impact has influenced our day-to-day livelihood. So if we want to pinpoint at where in the timeline that something goes wrong and leads us towards where we are currently, we can actually take a look at how age of the Anthropocene comes into the picture. So you can see this is a line graph showing various different type of parameters. So for example, the one in red is population, the one in blue is CO2 concentration, and you have other parameters as well. So something happened in 1950s that eventually causes a very rapid increase in all these different type of parameters, especially CO2 concentration. So CO2 concentration is something that we wanted to be very aware of because the current global warming phenomenon that we are in is entirely because of the CO2 concentration, which led towards the global warming effect. And it will tie back towards the greenhouse gases later on because CO2 is one of the dominant parameter that is measured under the greenhouse gas, right? So you might be thinking this is very difficult to digest, right? So let me show you this. So this is the great acceleration diagram. And if you are someone that is in the sustainability field, the great acceleration is something that I'm sure it's not foreign to you. So based on the earlier line graph, we can actually break it down according to these two big sectors. One is the socioeconomic trends, and the other one is on the Earth system trends. So to guide you through, so what happened in 1950 is actually the Industrial Revolution happened, right? So when when the Industrial Revolution happened, immediately the two main thing is that food can be stored much more longer. It can be transported much more further than its source, right? So that actually facilitates the world population to skyrocket in a mere of couple of decades. So yes, in terms of socioeconomic development, that's very good because now we can feed more people, we can demand for more socioeconomic development, right? So all these are related to socioeconomic GDPs, FDIs, urban population, energy usage, water usage, and so on and so forth. But a lot of people don't understand back then that there is a hidden cost with all this improvement in terms of social economy. And this is where the Earth system pays the price for it. So on the right side of this diagram here, you can actually see that these are several indicators of the Earth system. So similarly to humans, where you are measuring your blood sugar level, you're measuring your cholesterol level, you're measuring your cortisol level, and so on and so forth. So these are the indicators that we're actually using to measure how does the Earth as a system um, um, behaves or is doing the well-being of the Earth system itself. So carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and also ozone, these are actually key components that leads us towards the global warming that we are facing now. And you can also see that the surface temperature, ocean acidification also shows similar trends. So if you put everything together on top of one another and you do an extrapolation or a correlation study, you will be able to understand that there is a direct linkage towards what did the humans do towards how the Earth system have behaved according to this graph. So for those that deny that whatever that we are facing currently in terms of climate change or the global warming is not because of human, then this is the evidence to show you that everything is interlinked. So you might be thinking, okay, yes, there's a solid correlation. So we acknowledge that yes, it's because of the human doing that leads us towards the current climate scenario that we are in. But so what? Right? So this is where I wanted to also bring you to this interconnection map. Right. So this is from the Global Risk Report from World Economic Forum. So this is from 2020. But what I really wanted to show you is that how one event can actually cascade into different types of impact. So sitting at the middle of this global risk is actually climate action failure. So we are talking about how we are not able to control climate change from happening. We're not able to um, and we can see much more extreme weather happening. So you might be thinking this is the direct linkage between climate action failure and extreme weather. But if you look at this interconnection map, there are several ways that this can actually further cascade into. For example, how can this lead towards um, asset bubbles or even financial failure, right? So you can look at how climate action failure triggers, let's say, for example, extreme weather. They can also trigger natural disasters, right? And that could also link towards involuntary migration. So when people start to move away from one place to another, legally they might be able to do. It might move. For example, when I say climate action failure, let's take an example of rising sea levels, right? So for those that are living in the coastal areas, where they can go, I mean, where they can migrate to, either they go inland, or if let's say inland do not allows them, they would need to go to other places. So if let's say they are moving involuntarily and illegally, that would also cause other problems such as social instability, unemployment, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to show here is that the problems that we are facing because of this climate action failure can trigger to a lot of other social, economic related problems, right? So I hope I can show you in a way that how important it is to understand what is carbon, where it originates from, what are the current situation we are in, and what kind of implication it has when we don't really govern the carbon in a very good manner. So the next question that we might be thinking is that, okay, so I borrowed this slide from Academy Science Malaysia, and this is during when they presented about the National Planetary Health Action Plan. So the question here is that how much disturbance on the planet can endure, right? So similarly, if we are talking about human physiological well-being, so we will monitor blood sugar level, and there's always a range where the blood sugar level should be, right? Anything lesser than that is not good because that would trigger anemia. And anything more than that is also not good because it will also start to affect the other bodily organs as well. So the same thing goes for cholesterol level, goes for your heart rate and so on and so forth. So a group of researchers from the Stockholm Resilient Research Center have actually came up with this planetary boundaries concept, where they actually introduced 9 planetary boundaries. So this is the boundaries where um, it tells the story of how much the planet can endure. So what would be the safe operating or safe development boundaries, right? When we talk about development, because there's always so I think it's also a common understanding that Earth, the resources on Earth is finite. So when we are talking about a finite resource ecosystem, there's always an upper boundary to the level we can um, develop without causing any drastic changes to the whole ecosystem. So they have been monitoring the different types of parameters of the Earth system, and throughout from 2009 to 2025. So this is released sometime last year. So from the 9 boundaries assessed, 7 of those are actually crossed. So talking about safe space for development, we have crossed 7 out of the 9 boundaries that we assess, right? So this gives you an indicator to understand that, okay, we understand the seriousness of this problem now. Sorry. Okay, so we understand the seriousness of this problem now. So this is also where it reflects what can we do, right, collectively. So whenever we talk about sustainability, regardless of sustainable development goals, or even we talk about planetary health, the intersection of people, planet, and profit, or we always call this as the 3P framework, is very important, because there's no point for you to only focus on profit, right? So we are talking about economic viability and financial performance business do very well, but at the expense of planet, right? We are talking about the ecosystem health, we are talking about the environmental health. So the same thing goes for people as well. So so there is always a need to find a balance between these people, planet, and profit. We cannot abandon either one of it, right? Then with this equilibrium in point, then it's possible to achieve the true sustainability that we are longing for. So I believe today's topic is really on how we connect people, planet, and more importantly, the importance of how businesses can be much more sustainable down the road, right? So there are a lot of misconceptions saying that carbon dioxide or carbons are actually greenhouse gases. So it is true to a certain level, but not entirely true. So if you look at the definition according to ISO 14064, so greenhouse gases are actually atmospheric gases that absorb and emit infrared radiation. So basically what these gases does is that they are able to create a blanket on the Earth atmospheric level, causing the all the heat energy or the infrared energy to not be able to escape into the outer atmosphere. So trapping all this heat within the Earth ecosystem. And this triggers a global phenomenon of global warming. So these are the common 7 Kyoto Protocol gases, from CO2 all the way to nitrogen trifluoride. And these are some of the sources from where they are mainly originating from. So for a lot of greenhouse gases accounting, we are much more interested in the first 3, because mainly they are much more dominant, um, more commonly available, I would say, in our day-to-day life, right? We engage this much more frequently. And GHG reporting is actually, it involves quantification and also accounting, meaning that we audit the amount of emissions that are actually released, right? So so these are then actually converted into carbon dioxide equivalent. So carbon dioxide equivalent is a common unit used to express, because how else are we able to compare, let's say, the global warming potential for nitrous oxide compared to methane, compared to carbon dioxide and other fluorinated gases. So an equation was introduced so that we can actually bring all these different type of gases into one comparable unit. So this is the formula. How is it measured, right? So CO2 equivalent is the amount of greenhouse gas multiplied by the global warming potential. So the global warming potential, you can actually use, you can refer to reports like the IPCC, for example, to get the latest global warming potential of specific gases. So this is actually slowly hinting how we're actually doing the greenhouse gas quantification. First of all, you need to understand how much of greenhouse gases, let's say from the carbon dioxide source, is measured, multiplied by the global warming potential, and you repeat the same process for other gases that are relevant to your entity or to your project events or even to your individual, right, at an individual level. So all this can be broken down simpler by having a more structured GHG inventory. Oh, so I think it's also important to mention that when we are measuring global warming potential, it's usually based on a consideration of the impact towards 100-year time horizon. So we are talking how quickly they break down and how persistent they are in the atmospheric level over a certain period of time. So with that being said, so we talk about how the intersection of people, planet, and also profit. So businesses are being pressured to do better because I think it's also a common understanding that whatever we are in currently in this situation is also mainly driven by a very heavy consumerism um, practice, right? So businesses play a very important role to ensure that we can sort of reverse the kind of impact that we have done to the current Earth system. So there are few ways that these businesses are being held accountable, right? So through governments, investors, or regulators are increasingly requiring this organization to disclose emission. So this is also reflected in various for example, in Malaysia, Bursa Malaysia is actually requiring public listed companies to do their share in disclosing emission. And later on, I have an example, or I mean, I have examples to show you what are the sustainability report and how do they do their emission disclosure, right? So that's one end. So you have the regulators, the government, and investors keeping an eye and demanding for businesses to be more clean, more green. And then you also have climate commitments. So so because following the first point, companies now also have a lot of climate commitments. For example, they would aim for being net zero or carbon neutrality. So these are the two most commonly known climate commitments. And later, perhaps I will also share a little bit more. And not only companies or businesses are having their own climate commitments. Entities like the university itself, like University Malaya, we also have our net zero and carbon neutrality commitments, where we wanted to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030 and hopefully net zero by 2050. So in order for us to actually claim this, it must be backed by evidence, right? So how do we ensure that we have a very transparent, robust accounting sheet so that people can actually keep an eye to check, are they I mean, are we for example doing the right thing towards ensuring that the emissions are being whole following the climate commitments that we have made, that we have pledged earlier. So it's also very important to understand that you cannot manage what you cannot measure. I think this is there's there's no further explanation needed for this, right? So this is also the importance of why do you need to understand how do you measure greenhouse gas emission. And later on, this is where the standards come in, because if without a proper standard, then you'll not be able to create a greenhouse gas report that is comparable across different sectors, different countries, and so on and so forth. So this is where the standards come in to ensure that the report or the greenhouse gas quantification that you have done will be able to be robust, it can be challenged, and it can also be backed by evidence. And then more frequently nowadays, we talk about businesses being ESG literate or the importance of ESG towards how the a certain companies or certain firm can grow, especially in this current time that we are in, right? So organizations might face some risks in terms of reputational risk when they do not do well in terms of their environmental responsibility. So environmental responsibility is a very big word. It's very broad. But if we look into sustainability reports here and then, climate responsibility, environmental responsibility are used quite interchangeably. But for our context of discussion, I think we will just focus on greenhouse gas emission specifically, right, moving forward. So these are the kind of expectation that are being put onto different parties. So from I have also covered about ESG slightly earlier. So to talk about how corporate practice how they implement ESG. And then you also have regulatory frameworks, be it at the international level, regional level, or even national level. So, for example, you have the US SEC climate rules, the European Union CSRD. These are requiring the frameworks to, I mean, these are the frameworks that requires businesses or even public listed companies to make their emission disclosure mandatory. And if we look back closer to Malaysia, then we have regulatory bodies like the Bursa Malaysia, requiring public listed companies to disclose their emission, their part of emission. And slowly we will also see more and more regulatory framework to address along the supply chain. So this will also include those from the SMEs or non-public listed companies as well. So we will cover that in a few slides later on. But basically, these are the kind of expectation from the regulatory bodies. And then you also have the other sectors like the investors, banks, and also supply chain asking, what are your emissions? Because remember, it's all in an ecosystem, right? So you might be thinking that, okay, maybe today, if let's say I'm coming in from an SME to assemble or maybe to acquire, let's say, timber woods for a furniture company. So furniture company, they might be just doing the assembling, the designing of all these furnitures, but they must source it from somewhere, right? So let's say you are coming in from SMEs, and you are the provider for all the timber woods. So if let's say there's no proper disclosure done at these timber woods, then you might also risk that have your, I mean, you also risk that the opportunity that you have to do business with a company which is very peculiar about ESG practices, right? So especially the emission part. So you might lose business opportunity there. So the same thing goes to investors and banks because eventually they are the ones that are going to supply the financial capital for you to do business. And since they are also public listed entity, so they are also required to ensure that the portfolios that are being invested are also green along the supply chain. So eventually it will come back to a full circle to understand that everyone has to be a part of moving into a more sustainable, more responsible business down the road. So other than the businesses or regulatory or investors, so universities, governments, and NGOs are also stepping up to so they are on one end they are also being much more proactive in their climate ambition, and they are also doing work to ensuring that businesses are also being kept responsible um, towards their emission, right, in total. So this is where the emissions turns into decisions at the end of the day. And these are where the opportunity lies. So later on, I will share about career, right? So this is actually where the opportunities are. So for example, these are the things that would require a dedicated person to do. For example, where the emissions are coming from, you need a dedicated skill set to identify where are the sources. And then you need to quantify the scale of impact. So you need to understand how to do the calculation, the quantification. And then further down, if let's say you wanted to do, you want to do a climate, a net zero or carbon neutrality claim, then you would also need to start to understand, to do some further analytics to understand where is the baseline, what are the reduction targets, what are the interventions, what kind of mechanism is put into place to track your progress. And eventually you will also need to um, communicate to stakeholders and public. And finally, you also need to ensure verification of your carbon neutrality claim. So this is where all of what I've mentioned earlier can be turned into a career portfolio. So it can also be coming from a consulting perspective also, or you can also be a standalone skill provider in terms of quantification of GHG emissions and so on and so forth. So that I hope we are in the same page currently. So to understand what is carbon, how it links to the greenhouse gases, and how businesses are currently being put accountable into ensuring that they can do better in terms of emissions and also sustainable development. So now let's move on into GHG reporting, which is something that is much more technical in a way. So to start with, I would like to explain what is scope 1, 2, and 3. So this is a very nice diagram, and it's quite actually. So to start with, let's go with the upper part here. So these are actually the greenhouse gases that are commonly released through all sorts of activities, from upstream activities all the way to downstream activities. So company, so you have whatever that. So when I say company, it could be individual, it could be one business entity, it could be the whole university, it could be a faculty, right? So the scale of um reporting really lies in you determining where is your boundary. So I can report the greenhouse gas emission for, let's say, UMSDC today. I can also do the same thing when I expand the boundaries to cover University Malaya campus, the KL campus. Or if I want, I can also further expand the boundaries to cover all the other entities of University Malaya out of KL. For example, we have a research site at Bachok, Kelantan. We have a site in Negeri Sembilan. So I can also cover that depending on the scope of boundary that I have set today, right? So when I say reporting company, it will tie towards the boundary where you set, okay? So let's talk about direct emissions first, which is the scope 1. So basically, as an entity, you would have activities associated to emissions. So for example, if let's say University Malaya, we have company vehicles, right? We have our vans, our buses, our four-wheel drives, our tractors, and so on and so forth. And all these vehicles are running on fossil fuels, diesels, petrol, right? So all the emissions that are generated, let's say the trucks doing some road repairing work, or even buses that we own, carrying students from the residential college to faculties, for example. All these emissions will be gathered and compiled under scope 1 of University Malaya, where it is defined as the sources owned or controlled by the organization, right? So usually these are referring to fuel combustion. So there are certain cases as well. For example, if let's say in labs, for example, certain labs in University Malaya, we are very broad in the sense of activities. Certain faculties you have labs, certain faculties you do not have lab. So for example, Faculty of Science. So Faculty of Science, you have a lot of labs, right? And within the labs, you might have experiments, or you have certain gases used. So those kind of emissions would also be parked under scope 1, direct emissions. And then you also have other activities. For example, if let's say what's that thing? So when the trimming activities. So when you trim, you use that grass cutter, right? So grass cutter is also fueled by fossil fuels. So those are also considered as direct emissions if they are owned or controlled by your organizations. Okay, so those are within the scope of scope 1 and within the reporting company. So let's take a look at scope 2. So scope two is indirect energy emission. So this is quite straightforward actually. So like in the Malaysian context, we usually do not purchase electricity for heating or steam. We usually use electricity for air conditioning only. So unlike different climates, it's common to purchase energy. I mean, there are energy purchase for heat or steam alone, but in our case, usually it's the electricity consumed by the organization. So the way that you want to understand is that it's very simple. For example, we are currently in a room for sure. You could be at your home, I could be at University of Malaya, and some people might be cafe hopping, who knows, right? So we are actually utilizing all this electricity. For example, I'm in this room, I'm using the centralized aircon, I'm also lighted in my office. So there are emissions generated, but this is not within the compound itself. So the energy that we are using might be coming from, let's say, a hydroelectric power, uh, 50 kilometers away from UM. So that's the emission that is generated there, but it's actually being used here in the local context. So the same thing, it happens regardless whether you are doing individual reporting or you are doing an entity reporting. Scope 2 always refers towards the energy emission. So the way that you can actually identify how much of energy you use is through your electricity bill. So this is also how we usually capture our scope 2 emission. So we refer to the electricity bill in the amount of usage, and then we multiply by the emission factor. Then we will get the amount of energy, oh no, sorry, the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions emitted from energy usage in this whole organizations. So that's scope 2. And then you have scope 3. So scope 3 is always the tricky part towards the whole greenhouse gas accounting because it's all the other indirect emissions. So this, I mean, this is, I mean, the usual one would be the business travel, supply chain, employee commuting, product use and disposal. But let me give you an example so that you can have a better understanding how complicated it is in terms of scope 3. So for example, if let's say today, I wanted to buy a mouse, right? So um, if we break this mouse into its different type of components, you have the clicker, you have the scrolling wheel, you have sensors, you have the lighting system, and you have all sorts of chips. And it comes from all over the world, right? So maybe it is assembled in China. Is it assembled in China? It's made in China, right? So it's made in China. So where does the screw comes from? It might be originating from another part of the world. And the same thing goes from the other parts of the mouse itself. So how do you calculate all those emissions? And eventually this would be the product emission, um, greenhouse gas emission for this product, right? So this is an example of scope 3. So if we want to look at some another example. So for example, friends, in a university setting, and that is very common. So we will travel by flight if it is somewhere very far away and it's not reachable by land means, right? So you cannot go there by train or you cannot go there by um basically other land means, and you have to fly there. So what is the carbon dioxide equivalent from your trip flying from KLIA, let's say, to one of your destination? So all those CO2 equivalent would actually be counted as your scope 3 emission. So this is also the complicated part because when we talk about travel, you have different type of routes. You have different type. I'm just talking about business travel and continuing the example from flight just now. So you have different type of airplanes as well. You have big airplanes, you have small airplanes. You have airplanes functioning on different type of capacity, right? Some would have bigger engines, some smaller engines. Bigger engines, bigger emission. Smaller engines, smaller emissions. And what about ground travel when you have reached your destination? So how do you capture all those emissions? So all this complicates the process of understanding the scope 3 emissions coming from a reporting company, right? So that's where the scope 3 becomes, if we go according to GHG protocol, optional because of the complexity in reporting all this indirect emissions. Okay. Um, Yeah, so basically I'll skip through this because I just explained it to you. So these are the indirect emissions as well. Okay. So hopefully with that lays a foundation of understanding how we can actually do this greenhouse gas quantification, right? Considering scope 1, 2, and 3, right? So next step. So how are the emissions are actually calculated? So now we are talking about the actual thing, right? So eventually we wanted to achieve, what we want to achieve is that we want to measure what is the CO2 equivalent. So from step 1, we need to understand the activity data, and secondly, emission factor. So this is the final outcome. And this is actually this is the easiest part actually, because we said the easiest part, slightly easier than activity data, I would say, because emission factors are usually constant, and you can refer them back straight to international reports such as IPCC. So under this IPCC report, there are specific emission factors, and sometimes emission factors um, can also be different from one context to another. For example, when we talk about electricity emissions from grid electricity, different from, let's say, tropical climate with seasonal climate, because the amount of emissions generated would be very different. So, of course, there's always a best practice when it comes to emission factor. If possible, use emission factors that are much more closer to your local context. So, like in our case, we are referring to official reports from TNB, right? So they actually disclose the grid emission factor. But in other case where, usually in the local context, you cannot get the emission factor, then you can refer to the next level, which is regional, and then you can slowly move up. If you don't have the access to the relevant emission factor, then you can use an international reference. So that's the part for emission factor. So coming back to the most complicated thing, which is activity data. So for you to have a very holistic calculation of GHG emission, you need to have a very thorough understanding of the whole of what your organization does. So and as I have given you an example, how one faculty differs from the other faculties in terms of daily operation. Some have lab, some don't have lab. So when I say some have lab, so we have situation where um the uh, fridge or air conditioning in certain labs are required to run 24 hours, 7 days a week, because they used to store sample, and sample need that kind of environment to ensure that they do not um, contaminate, or they do not uh, I mean, the quality is there. I mean, you secure your sample, right, in terms of quality assurance. So for certain faculties, like for example, Faculty of Business and Economics, you don't have the kind of lab where you need to store sample, right? So the operation, or I would say the emissions coming from a Faculty of Science, where you have constantly running labs, with faculties that do not have that same kind of setting would be very different. So this is within different faculties. What about um residential college? So residential college also have different sizes. Some accommodate more, some accommodate lesser. And then you also have certain residential college are equipped with air conditioning. Some are still running on natural ventilation fans. So in that case, it's also a very huge discrepancy when you want to compare one with another. So then you also need to understand, for example, in our case, when we did this greenhouse gas emission accounting for University Malaya, we were stuck. We were stuck. I'll share more about the experience later, but we need to understand how many cars that University Malaya owns. And also for those that are online today, do you know how many buildings that we have in UM? We have 500 buildings in UM. If you want to go deep to understand how each building is actually contributing towards the emission, how long would it take? So, but of course, I mean, we wouldn't go down that discussion to identify like how we did it. But short story is that there are ways that we can actually simplify um activity data. So for example, if let's say we are considering transport alone, so we can actually merge all the transport, regardless whether they belong to a certain faculty or other responsible centers. We just group all the vehicles that are owned under Unisi Malaya as one category, and then we try to understand what is the fuel consumption. And of course, there are several ways that we can further um, make this kind of quantification much more accurate. For example, if you are able to pinpoint what kind of fuel is being used, what is the engine capacity, what is the um, year, or is there any frequent maintenance towards that particular vehicle? All this information would actually help to enhance the accuracy of the emission estimation. But eventually, and this is also very important for those that are very new to this GHG emission, eventually all these are actually estimation. So unless you have actual data to measure, you measure actual data, all the greenhouse gas emission are as good as estimation only based on the type of emission factors that you choose, based on the quality of the activity data that you have, how granular that you can actually go. Those would determine how good or how reliable or how close your GHG estimation would be towards the real one. So eventually, what I'm trying to say here or try to emphasize here is that it's all an estimation. So um, the better set of data that you use, then the better or more accurate emission data that you will have at the end of the day. So this is how the emissions are actually calculated. Wait, let me see. There's a okay, all right, right. So let's move into standards, frameworks, and certification. So I think I've also mentioned it at the very beginning, the importance of standards, because eventually you want to come up with a GHG quantification report where people can actually use to um, benchmark, right? If it makes sense. So for example, and I will show you later on the GHG quantification that we have done in UM. So maybe straight up, I can tell you that we only cover scope 1 and 2 up to this point. And because of the complexity of scope 3, we are not able to go down that road, because if we want to start to look into scope 3, it will also require a lot of um, data collection. So we're talking about manpower, we're talking about financial budget as well, because it's not an easy task to do, to understand the whole emissions for the indirect emissions that are along the supply chain, right? So it's very complicated. So this is where the standards come in. So if you are referring to GHG protocol, scope 3 usually are optional, because and scope 3 is also something that is recommended because it's using an international standard for GHG accounting and reporting, right? It's developed by the World Resources Institute and WBCSD. So these are very reputable institutes or organizations to help businesses to start into this greenhouse gas accounting route before you want to commit yourself into something that is much more rigid, such as the ISO standards. So for starters, I would recommend you to go through the GHG protocol, because this is very straightforward in a sense, and it's much more easier for you to pick up. And in fact, if you do a very quick online search, you can even get some GHG templates, right? GHG reporting templates, like basically breaking down according to what kind of they are actually available in Excel format. So they already have the columns and rows for you to fill in. Some also they already have the emission factors fill in, so that you can just choose the different type of emission factors to calculate your greenhouse gas emission. So there are plenty of resources online for you to start with the GHG protocol. So this is like sort of the entry level for GHG emission accounting. But then you will also have other standards. And these standards are usually put into practice. So for example, the one that I am certified, it's under ISO 14064. So this is the international standard for GHG quantification, monitoring, reporting, and verification. So what does it mean? So eventually, when Daniel introduced me as a GHG practitioner, what does it mean? It means that I'm equipped with the knowledge and understanding to carry out a GHG quantification, uh, monitoring, and to the level of preparing a report. And at the same time, I'm also certified to lead a verification and validation process towards a report that is generated by different entities. I cannot prepare the report myself and then I validate and verify. So I can prepare the report, either prepare the report for my institute and get a third party to come in to do the validation and verification for my GC report. And I can also do the same validation and verification processes for entities out there in that case. So this is based on ISO standards. And then you will have also other standards such as the Carbon Disclosure Project, you have TCFD. So if you are in the space of ESG or climate sciences, responsible business, so these are the commonly used standards practiced internationally. So like for example, TCFD links climate risk to financial reporting. So it's also important for you to understand in the business sector, it's becoming much more important for them to predict what kind of disruption that future climate scenarios might affect the current business. For example, if let's say um, in the future climate scenario, um, there is um, there is a likelihood of flooding, right? The rise of mean sea level causes flooding. And if let's say you are a business entity having your main operating stations or factory along the coastal, so from now on, you might need to think ahead about how would you like to reinvest your factory or your businesses portfolios into somewhere which is much more safer, considering the upcoming climate scenario. So these are the kind of things that I mean the framework or standards that are being put in place to ensure these businesses start to think ahead about so two ways. One, how their businesses are contributing towards um, the climate change. And secondly, on the other side is to understand how the climate change is also affecting their business. So this is particularly important for banks, for investors, so that because eventually if they wanted to invest in something in a business, they need to ensure that the business is sustainable, it's climate resilient, and it's free from a lot of shocks or disruptions towards that business, right? So these are the considerations that are being put currently by banks or investors, or even um, Busas, for example, right? So these are the things that they are being um, emphasized. So and then you can also see very commonly public listed companies are also referring to the science-based targets to look at how they can make their businesses much more environmental friendly, right? So then I think this is also important. I included this slide to sort of give you a hint that um, what is certification and what it isn't. So certification here signals that you understand the standards and methodology, right? So you, like for in my case, I sit through a 1 week course to go very deep into understanding what are the we went through line by line for the whole standards, ISO standards for 14064 part 1, 2, and 3. We also covered a little bit on ISO 14067 on product neutrality and 14066, which is on carbon neutrality. We also covered a little bit on that. So eventually, after going through that 1 whole week course, we will need to take examinations. So the examination is approved to show that yes, we are knowledgeable about the ISO standards, and we are also competent to lead a preparation of a GHG report, and also, if needed, to verify or validate a GHG report, right? So that's the certification. At the end of it, you get a certification to tell you, okay, you are somebody that is competent. So it is important because when you have that kind of certification, it gives credibility. So when you are talking to clients, when you are talking to auditors or regulators, they are assured that you know what you are doing, right? The report um, is up to a certain level of standard, right? So, but this is where the catch is. The certification alone is not enough, and most of the time it's not enough because um, for you to be good in what you are doing, you need to go hands on, right? So this is where the real competence shape a good GHG practitioner, right? It comes from actual practice. So what it means is that you need to work around actual organizational data, and this is what I did with the UM setting to understand where are the data gaps, how can we fix the data gaps, and then we make judgment calls, builds um we sort of like also suggest to the upper management what do we need to do, because now we have climate ambitions, right? We have our carbon neutrality goals, we have our net zero goals. How so our role will become, instead of telling this is how much emission that is being generated by University Malaya, to a more strategic role to advise this is the current baseline, this is where we are currently, and how far we are from our climate emissions, and what can we do, and what kind of commitment that we need from the top management to ensure that we are moving towards the climate ambition that we have pledged um, publicly, right? So to keep it, or to summarize it in a very short, certification is really a starting point. It gives you the technical knowledge, it gives you a sort of a credibility, but this is really the starting point, but not an end point for you. This is really the starting point for you to do it in a more structured way. And along the way, and I believe this is also where I am currently, um, I've only been certified last year, not very long, but we have been picking this up since early 2022 to this is 2026. So it's about 4 years now. We are doing this greenhouse gas accounting and quantification exercise. So I think along the way, I've also met a lot of like-minded people from different industries, and they also might ask, like you are a university, you are a higher learning institute, you are not mandated to do this greenhouse gas emission to start with. So why are you doing this? So I think there are few reasons that we can put into it, but basically when you meet along the like-minded people, you actually gain more opportunities to talk to others about your pain point and to see if others have recommended solutions to address the same pain point. Or it's always a sharing and learning together kind of approach when it comes to this greenhouse gas emission, because it's a very new field. Okay. So maybe I'll just bring back the discussion to how I got into this GHG practitioner certification. So I think I will start here from UMSDC. Um, from the list of registered participants, I know some of you are not coming from UM. So maybe it will be a good opportunity for me to also introduce University Malaya Sustainable Development Center, or UMSDC in short. So I like to start with this because it gives a very clear background of how UM is. So this is an aerial view of how UM is, right? So you can see the highway is actually creating a boundary and enclosing UM as an entity. But if you look at where we are in terms of our vicinity, we are sandwiched between KL and also Petaling Jaya. These are the two highest urbanized area in Malaysia. And you can see from the rate of urbanization, you can basically don't see that much of green space surrounding us, except, in UM itself, we have a gazetted rainforest of green space here in UM. But what I'm trying to say here is that when we look at this diagram, we need to understand that if we are looking at an ecosystem or an urban area, we are facing the same kind of pressure. Oh, sorry. We are facing the same kind of pressure that is equally felt when, let's say, KL or PJ face a water disruption. It will be equally felt here in UM itself. So, and UM itself is also generating emission. So that is also contributing towards the city level emission, if we look at it that way. So UMSDC has started our sustainability movement, and it started with a group of like-minded people actually they started with one question: how can we do better to take care of the environment within the campus? And then we started to look at how we can, let's say, for example, ensure that the waste that is generated within UM is properly managed. And how can we take a better responsibility towards ensuring that the water governance here in UM is done rightfully, right? So this is also sort of the latest development of sustainability at University Malaya. So we are also looking at how we can embed ESG, because ESG is not something new. Everyone is talking about ESG nowadays. And part of our stakeholders in the business sectors is also talking, we have to talk the same language as well. So currently we are also looking at how we can embed ESG into our sustainability policy. So this is inactive since 2021 to 2030, but we are currently in the process of refinement, where we wanted to embed ESG into the sustainability policy of the University Malaya. So we also have a net zero campus blueprint. So this is already made available in our. So we wanted to be carbon neutral by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So of course, down the road, there are still a lot of refinement needed, especially when it comes to what kind of strategies that we wanted to implement towards achieving carbon neutrality by 2030, right? What are the current benchmark and how do we get there? So this is sort of the two main reference policy when it comes to sustainability. So for the net zero blueprint carbon neutrality by 2030, we are basing it on the United Nations Sustainable Development Solution Network document on net zero on campus. So we have adapted it to a University Malaya context-specific document. So I think very importantly here, maybe I would also take just a very brief moment to explain to you what is carbon neutral. So carbon neutral here is that we need to balance between releasing. So on a daily basis, we will release emissions, right? Carbons. And then there is also the activity of absorbing carbon. So absorbing carbon can come in various forms. It could be through green spaces, for example. The natural photosynthesis process captures atmospheric carbon dioxide and store them as physical form of carbon in the soil, in the parts of the tree, for example. So that's carbon neutrality. So for net zero is cutting greenhouse gas emission close to zero as possible. So this is one step further to understand that how can we cut greenhouse gas emissions. So this would require us to shift away, let's say, from fossil fuel dominant electricity, right? So how can we invest in solar panels or other types of renewable energies so that we can cut greenhouse gas emission as much as possible to zero. And then you have the concept of just net zero. So this is where when we want to implement just net zero and based on the spirit of sustainable development goals, no one should be left behind. And we also acknowledge that the capacity for some individuals or some entities to achieve net zero would be different. So this is where the just net zero becomes our sort of approach. We need to ensure that we also need to consider the justice issue of social and economic welfare in line with the net zero targets. So it's not just heading towards net zero, but also in consideration of in the community. And how can we bring them in so that everyone is aboard in the same shape towards this just net zero at the end of the day. And I also like to take a moment to talk about Living Lab. So it's very important that SDC has championed Living Lab in UM. And Living Lab is a way that we have been practicing. It's a way of action research where we try to understand what kind of problem exists in the current community. We try to experiment or propose solutions. So we usually do this through a co-developing participatory approach where we involve students, researchers, and even sometimes the community to understand what are the common problems that we are facing, what kind of solutions can we implement. We test bed those solutions and we try to improve those solutions to a level that it can be scaled. We can scale it out of University Malaya. So it starts from University Malaya, but the solution can then be applied to a broader urban context. like in Kuala Lumpur or Petaling Jaya, based on the aerial image that I've shown you earlier. So this is how the Living Lab is structured here in UMSDC. We started off with student projects. So as part of students' final year project, they would need to come up with identifying problems, coming up with solutions. And once those solutions are deemed feasible or promising, we will escalate it to a living lab, a larger internal grant living lab that is led by researchers. And eventually, we will actually grow if, let's say, they are able to create more prominent impact from the living lab, then we will grow it out um, to have a broader urban lab research with broader impact in Klang Valley. So this is where the combination of internal grant from the University of Malaya itself meets the external grants. It could come from industry, it could come from the town hall, it could also come from different ministries as well, or even local housing agencies. So that's how we sort of crafted a framework in a way that we grow, we tackle problems from very small all the way towards solving bigger, broader no, KL broad problems, right? So these are some of the statistics and also some success stories. So um over 10 years now, we have funded about 5.7 million for 84 living labs. Actually, there's more, including the current cycle in 2026. And these are some of the example, like for example, zero waste is actually an entity to look into how we can manage our waste in-house. So we're talking about food waste. So for example, for your information, food waste are actually managed totally in-house in University Malaya, right? So they have also captured collaborations along the line with banks, with Alam Flora, Global Tunikara, and then you also have another entity working on water governance. So these are the champions that have led the transformation of our Varsity Lake. So for those from UM, the Varsity Lake that you see now, you have very lovely ducks swimming very nicely, very calmly on the lake. You have in the evening, you have people kayaking on the river itself. Very nice, very beautiful, right? This would not be possible if it is not because of this group from Waterways. They have done so much over the course of 10 years to the lake that you see here in front of your eyes now. And then you will also have a group of researchers working on bioconservation. So in that green space of land that I shown you earlier, we host about 1,600 species, some very rare orchid species, which you cannot find elsewhere in the world. And when I say elsewhere, it means it's only in University Malaya, not even in KL or any part of Malaysia. It's only in University Malaya. So it's a very remarkable work that they have done over the years, funded by Living Lab. And they have also grown this into other um, bigger initiative. So then you also have the eco-friend Surau, and then you have safe disposal of unused medicine, partnering with Caring Pharmacy, and also it's currently being implemented straight at the University Malaya Medical Center, like the hospital university that we have next to our Faculty of Medicine. So to sort of like put it short, after sharing what we have done for from an UMSDC perspective. So my first GHG reporting exercise really started off with a Living Lab project, where we wanted to understand what is the current emission stage, or sort of like the emission scenario within the University of Malaya. You can head over to perhaps maybe after this sharing session, I'll just very briefly bring you through some of the work that we have done and published openly on the online website. So this is the first GHG reporting attempt in since 2022. And at the very beginning of the stage, we really worked very hard on establishing the inventory, right? So to understand very thoroughly what are the activities that we are having on a daily basis in Unity Malaya, and soon we really it's a very steep learning curve actually, because then only we understand that there are so many buildings in Unity Malaya, there are so many cars, there are so many records that are not recorded, so many data is not available, and so on and so forth. There's so many challenge
But I believe over the course of 3 to 4 years now, we are slowly getting there in a way that we are doing it much more structured nowadays. And we are also slowly ensuring that the data collection process can be streamlined, automated towards a digital platform. So this is currently what we are doing currently. So and last year, building on top of the few GHG reports that we have done, I have attended and certified as this GHG practitioner by BSI Group. So in Malaysia, there are several entities that are offering this certification. So BSI is one of them. So there are a few more. I'm not promoting BSI, but you can actually do a very quick online search on understanding which are the entities that are offering this sort of certification program. Serum is another one, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so to share some of the lessons that I've learned from, Daniel is also part of the team and also the SDC team. So what we learned over the past 2 to 3 years. So the first one is data. I think this is also the most important lesson. For you to do a good GHG emission, you need very reliable data. So it means that where or who are the data owners? How do they safekeep it? How do you access it? So just by understanding what kind of data is available, how do we access it is still a mystery. We have not fully understand what kind of data do we have in a university setting, right? I'm basing this based on the current work that we have done for University Malaya. Some stays as a record as an Excel file in the staff's laptop. And in an organization like us, it's common that up to a certain years, there will be rotation, right? Meaning that the staff will be placed in other sectors or other section. And all this data will also follow that laptop. We have this kind of situation. So data is one. And I think this is also the biggest challenge. The second one is stakeholder buy-in. So this is also equally important because eventually we would need data owners to be part of the stakeholder, right? We need data from them because we are not doing the straight immediate data collection. Data collection, we were still depending on primary sources that do the data collection. So giving you, for example, if let's say we wanted to know scope 2 emission, which is electricity. So like in a big campus, we have two inlets of electricity source. So in these two inlets, we have smart meter installed. So basically, we are able to tell how much of electricity is coming into UM. But down the road, what we are trying to achieve here is that we wanted to know, for example, how much of electricity is being used for room A or for floor A, for building A for building A, for example. So we wanted to install this sort of smart metering in a more granular form so that we will be able to pick up very quickly if let's say there is an anomaly. Like is there a huge electricity drain? Is it because of someone stealing electricity or is it because of unused lab but the air conditioning or the freezer is still running 24/7. Suggests interventions later on so that we can actually come up with better solutions towards net zero or carbon neutrality at the end of it. So I think the learning curve, like I said, is very steep because we need to understand what kind of data do we have, what kind of activities that we are involved in. We need to set the boundaries. So you see, we are currently also in a stage of understanding should we include the University Malaya Medical Center together with the GHG report. Because as an university and as a hospital, teaching hospital, the activity is very different, right? The emissions that are coming from the healthcare sector is also very significant actually. So it's still a very huge learning curve that we are in currently. So it's always nice that when I go out or talk to like-minded people, I always get their opinion about how can we do it? How can we do better? How can we automate these kind of processes, right? So these are some of the quick sharing of the direct lessons that were acquired through this 2 to 3 years exercise. So yeah, so these are the challenges I face and still face currently. So like I mentioned, data availability, boundary decision, and scope 3 complexity. So I'll show you later on in the online website later on about scope 3 estimation based on literature review. So I see I'm also running a little behind. Okay, let me go slightly quicker. So this is almost towards the end. So for those that might be wondering, is it worth building a career in GHG reporting, and is it really a career? So you might be asking, is this an emerging green job? I can tell you yes. So things like GHG reporting, carbon accounting, verification are emerging green jobs because there is a demand for it, right? Organizations are increasingly seeking for professionals who can measure, report, verify, and explain emission data. So, and the reason why this is becoming an emerging job is because coming back to the regulatory expectations from regulatory framework, governments or institutions or international standards, organizations need to be more accountable now. They need to have stronger ESG compliance, sustainability reporting expectations, and then all of this, basically investor, regulators, supply chain pressure are also demanding the same thing. So if you go to LinkedIn or if you are going to any sort of like job markets, you can look at how these job titles are emerging: GHG analyst, carbon accounting, GHG or carbon verified, ESG sustainability analysis, climate disclosure specialist, net zero analysis. And these are the kind of the main focus that are expected of these job titles. And I have the next page. You might be, the next question you might be thinking of, I've already think ahead. So in Malaysia context, this has becoming much more relevant because Bursa Malaysia has also enhanced sustainability reporting requirements using this IFRS sustainability disclosure standards from January 2025 onwards, right? So it's a very huge demand currently. Okay, so you might be asking, do they pay well? So this is just from a very quick online search. So in a Malaysian market, you can earn 60 to 100K per year. So for analyst level carbon ESG roles or with senior consultants or managers, potentially higher, right? With them, I mean higher level executive would have higher pay rate lah, right? So the same thing you can also see across Singapore, US, or even in UK, Europe, Middle East, right? So these are the rates currently per year. And if you look at Singapore, I think it's sort of a quite lucrative pay for this job. But also there's a disclaimer here because for Malaysian market especially, we don't have that much of data to show what is the actual average, because so this is based on one salary database only. So I think take it with a bit of grain of salt lah, right? These are indicative more than definitive, but we can see clearly that the demand for this job title are increasing, that's for sure. And with this in mind, with this demand in place, I'm sure there will also follow a certain level of pay grade towards this kind of sought after skills in the current market now. So this is a very quick way that you can sort of like position yourself, like how do you want to ensure that you go into GHG reporting. So you can either go in through a consulting firm or corporate ESG team, or you can do auditing and verification. You can also join this third-party assurance group corporations, or you can also sit in government and policy related agencies to help design reporting framework, national inventories, or like me, you can also sit in academia and research, where you can help to develop methodologies and do training or workshops, capacity building to ensure that more people are equipped with this GHG reporting knowledge, right? So this is sort of like the different angle that you can actually come into the GHG reporting space. So in terms of what the employers and clients actually look for when it comes to GHG reporting, it's really to build inventories, set targets, and prepare reports. because they are very new to this, they don't know how to do this. So they hope that they can hire somebody to come in and actually do this for them. So it's very common to see this, especially in those public listed companies. They would just outsource this part of work to some consulting firms to do it, right? And for smaller companies, they can also, I mean, long-term wise, hopefully, and we can also see more titles such as chief sustainability officers in public listed companies. So, and I can see some of their strategies is actually to develop this department and also handpick few people to come in and start to do this on a long term instead of outsourcing this activity to consultants yearly, right? Because you need this yearly, so it will be much more cost effective down the road if, let's say, you have a dedicated team to work on this. Other type of things that are expected is analytical skill. So how do you work with incomplete data, for example? How are you able to make defensible estimates based on the have and that kind of competence. Communication. So this is also important. How do you crunch big numbers, complex numbers into things that can be understood by the board, for example? Because usually the boards are non-technical. They only wanted to know how much of investments comes in and how much how effective is certain kind of implementation or intervention that can help the company or firm move towards their climate ambition. So they only wanted that. Then other things are like how reporting errors have legal and reputational consequence. You need to have attention to those kind of details, and also cross-functional thinking, such as how GHG cut across finance, operations, legal, and also strategies, right? So these are the things that employers and clients are actually looking for, especially when I mean, these are the skill sets needed for the job titles that I've shown in the previous slide. So these are sort of like my advice to all of you, if let's say you are intending to move into this space. So I think it's very, very important to understand the organizational boundaries, because if you don't set a scope, you would be running in circles, and you'll not be able to complete your reporting at the end of the day if you don't have a very good um, understanding of the boundaries itself. So, and I have also mentioned this, I mean, at eventually this is actually an estimation. Unless you do a direct measurements to all your data sets, you will not be able to 100% confirm that these are accurate, right? And like I said, emission factors also deviate from one context to another. So if you look at the hierarchy of emission factors to choose from, I would recommend you to go as local as possible. And if you don't get that kind of emission factor, then you try to refer to the nearest one that you have, up all the way towards an international emission factor. So in terms of documentation, so all data has limitations that you need to document. So this will go along the principle of transparency and also the principle of openness. So to ensure that the work that you have done in terms of the GHG report can be trustworthy. So so this is also things that you need to pay attention, like you do not overclaim GHG report. So this is the region where sometimes when companies or firms start to overclaim certain things, then they are moving into the greenwashing territory. And this is not good, especially if we consider ESG, this would do some damage to the corporate reputation. So I think it's always good to be honest. And if you are not sure about something, you better just report as unsure, but you're finding ways to find the actuality towards it. Right. So don't work in silo, because this is also what we have learned one way or another, that when you set up your inventory, which is step one from GHG report, you need to work with everyone, because data comes from basically everywhere and in all sorts of form. Some data are manually handwritten. Like for example, in the early days, transport logbook are actually handwritten. Some handwritten are very difficult to read, some fade away, some are incomplete. So you need to work around those data as well. right? So how do you ensure that this, so to start with, you need to have a data, and then the data will come from all sorts of people. And I think the key message here is really that don't take certificate. I mean, the certification alone is really not enough. It's really the starting point, it's the entry point. And you really learn from going down to the ground and talk to people, and then collecting the building the inventory, and then to understand how can you close the data gaps, and so on and so forth. So all this requires hands-on experience, lah, right? To put it in simple. So these are some simple example, like how you can start. You can start with one complete inventory. You can actually look, and nowadays a lot of companies have disclosed their emission inventory, so you can refer to those published report to understand what kind of details are needed, to what level, to what extent do you need to report your emission. So I will show you one example later on from Gamuda. And then yeah, so basically I'll skip this through because later I'll just show you the report later on. I think I'll skip this also, considering the time is quite limited. We wanted to do this activity, but I think I will just skip ahead to show you the example. Okay, so let me stop sharing here for a while. Okay, so if you head over to UMSDC at um.edu.my or sustainability.um.edu.my, you can actually head over to this sustainability at UM tab. Under UM in low carbon cities framework, you can access some of the GHG report. I mean GHG emission from 2022 all the way to 2025. So let me show you from 2025. Okay, so I will skip all the boring stuff. Okay, so let's start from here. So so what we did, we actually collated the total estimated GHG emission from scope 1 emission. So coming from lorry, from van, from sedan, and etc. by diesel and petrol. So this is the way that we have come. So if you remember the slide that I showed you earlier, it's CO2 equivalent, right? So this is the eventually we wanted to measure. Quantity of fuel consumed is actually the activity data and multiplied by emission factor. So it's as simple as that. So in terms of emission factor, we have referred to UK DEFRA because we don't really have an emission factor for petrol and for diesel. So they have different type of CO2 equivalent. So we plug in all the numbers from January to December. So this is for diesel and petrol, for this type of vehicles, and these are for buses. So so in total, the overall is 366,000 estimate kg CO2 equivalent, right? Or 366.5 tons of CO2 equivalent. So this is only from vehicles alone. And then this is from fugitive emission. So in air conditioning system, usually they will also have leakage. So these are the type of emissions that are unintended, but still we need to capture them because they are releasing gases that are they have very high global warming potential, right? So these are also equally, we have also collected all this information from the refrigerant type, according to refrigerant type used in our air conditioning system. So we plug in all the numbers and then we get this amount, right? 19,000 tons CO2 equivalent. So that is for scope 1 emission. For scope 2 emission, referring to electricity. So this is mainly referring from the electricity bill that we have. So in total, we utilize 73,000 kilowatt hour, 73 million, sorry, 73 million kilowatt hour, and amounting to 54 million kg CO2 equivalent. So in total, we have total scope 1 and 2 equal would mount up to 73,000 tons CO2 equivalent. You can read more about this, but I really wanted to emphasize this one. Yeah. So what we have done here is that we have focused our GHG inventory and also reporting based on scope 1 direct emission and scope 2 indirect emission from purchased electricity. But we have omitted, or we have not moved into scope 3 emission, the disclosure of scope 3 emission. And mainly it's because of the complexity in terms of data collection. And also we sort of haven't find a way that we can do this in a proper manner. So from what we have done through some literature review, some peer institutions such as Monash University, for example, scope 3 accounts for about 64 to 70%. So I think equivalently, we can sort of like estimate that the current emission for scope 1 and 2 only represents maybe up to 30% of the actual emission, leaving 70% unrecorded or unmeasured coming from scope 3 itself. So in the future, we will start to look into some of the things that we might collect. For example, business travel, employee travel. These are the information that are sort of like the low-hanging fruit that we have currently. But we will also look into some of the other best practices that the other universities are doing so that we can also learn and adapt to our current needs. So if you want to read further about what we have done previously, you can head over to this website. Maybe I can get SDC's secretary to share this our webpage to the audience. Okay, so let me stop sharing and go back to my slide. Right, so this is basically what I mentioned just now. So we take the emission multiplied. So the emission will equal to the amount of activity done multiplied by the emission factor. Emission factor, we refer it from a global standard. So the same thing for electricity, but in our case, there is a Malaysian Energy Commission, so that we use the emission factor from this because it's much more local, and it would eventually give us much more an accurate representation of the emissions coming from electricity purchase. Okay, so I think this is the second last slide, perhaps. So to sum up what I've shared over the past nearing 2 hours now, 1.5 hours. GHG reporting is a professional discipline, and it's a very interdisciplinary one because you need to have some basic understanding of greenhouse gases themselves. You need to understand processes, and then you also need to move towards a more administrative or management kind of realm where you need to know what kind of data is collected, what kind of standards are being used to report, and what kind of things that you wanted to show your stakeholders. So stakeholders, it could be regulators, it could be your board, it could be government agencies, for example. So that's the first thing. So the second thing is the foundation is really simple. Eventually, I hope I have demonstrated how easy it is to actually calculation and several times that the difficulty is really in collecting the activity data to understand very thoroughly what kind of activities is associated to that particular entity. So when I say entity, it means that it could be individual, it could be a faculty, it could be a business, it could be a company having different type of sites around the world. It could also be as big as that, right? So that's the second thing. So the second thing, so if you refer to GHG protocol, you have scope 1, 2, and 3. I have explained it and dissecting it to you to tell you how do we actually categorize all these emissions so that it could also give you a starting point where to start. So by having a very good coverage of scope 1, 2, and 3, then it will also give you a full picture of an organization's climate impact because that's where your emission is. And then you can also refer to GHG protocol as a starter. And if you want to move into something much more technical, you can refer to ISO 14064. So in ISO 14064, it lists down what kind of things that you need to include in the report, from description of your entity all the way towards what kind of emission factor you use, what kind of assumptions are there. So so what I covered today didn't really touch about ISO 14064, but really mainly on GHG protocol in general. And I also shared in part of my presentation today that this is a space that there is increasing demand with this kind of skill sets needed, and especially this is driven by global and national demand on businesses to do more responsibly. So and I've also shared with you, I mean, from that very short survey on the salary range, it looks to me kind of lucrative actually, and worth starting a career in this space. So and finally, perhaps I will end with advising those that are interested in this to start small, be consistent, and also practice with real data. I think that really helps. Even in my case where I am certified now, when you work with the real thing, it really challenges you to think, because whatever the certification workshop or training can give you is all theoretical. Eventually the report that you will need to present or prepare, that is the real deal, right? So you really need to get your hands dirty on this. I would like to acknowledge, so these are the few living labs that have supported the direct possible work of this GHG emission calculation for the university. And also, of course, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone from the UM campus community that have supported, especially SDC and also our estate department, because they are the main data owners that have made this GHG accounting exercise possible. Otherwise, it would be impossible, right? So before I pass it back to Daniel, I wanted to show you one more thing. Um, okay. Show you this one. Am I screen share? Okay, right. So if you head over online, type any sort of emission report, you will get a lot of especially public listed companies where they would say this is the sustainability report. And usually, I mean, from what I observe, usually you will find ESG report, you will find sustainability report, and sometimes you will also find certain companies that would merge sustainability report with ESG report, with the emission report, right? So depends. So there's no one size fit all kind of way that they wanted to represent their company's responsible conduct. So so this is from Gamuda, and they are also at the very beginning they have indicate what kind of standards that they are following. So they are following the SBI, SBTI, they are following TCFD. And you can actually go through what kind of the storyline and the narrative of how Gamuda is actually doing sustainability in their part. But what I wanted to show you is towards the end, which is on wait, page 61. Wait, let me... Okay, so you see this is their emission report. So and this is a verification report by BSI, which is also the entity that offered the certification, the GHG practitioner certification to me. So this is the GHG emission report. So you can see from scope 1, 2, 3, and it refers to direct energy emissions from, for example, like in Gamuda's case, they have more than one boundaries, right? So they have this Horizon Hills Golf and Country Club, they have Kota Permai Golf and Country Club, Menara Gamuda. So this is a building, 100 Miller Street building. So this is in Celadon City. So so the reported amount is as such. So this is for scope 1 GHG emission for energy. And then for scope 2 energy indirect, then for the same entities as well, they have different type of reported amount of CO tons for CO2 equivalent. Water withdrawal, waste generated, all the way to which one? No, up until here. Sorry. So you see, this is how they actually report, and you see, based on that 2 hours that I mentioned, eventually in the sustainability report is just one slide, and this is not even the emission report. This is something else. So So what I'm trying to say here is that for being, for you to come up with this, the amount of work that you need to do, especially in collating all the data to quantifying, will eventually become one page. And then this document would be sent to a third-party verifier for them to verify and validate whether this your greenhouse gas report is satisfactory. So eventually this is the outcome from being from the whole GHG report, right? So I will stop here and I will pass it back to Daniel. I think we have 15 minutes left. Right, Daniel, over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Fong, for the very insightful and I would say very engaging discussions now. So we have now reached to the another section of our talk today, which is the Q&A session. So I have received some questions from the audience. So the first one is from sorry. So first one is from Kay. She's asking about she said that for example for accounting maybe ACCS or ICAES, then they can go to Big Four auditing. So for carbon accounting, is there a direct pathway or what's the recommended certification to take and pathway? Is there any examples for auditing and verification bodies that they can join?
Okay. So if we are referring to certification, I think the one that I have acquired, the GHG practitioner, and also lead GHG verifier and validator, that could be your entry point, because those are based on ISO standards, and ISO standards are globally applicable. So when you are equipped with the knowledge and competent to run this as a practitioner and also as a lead verifier and validator, then I think that could actually open the doors for you to move into this particular space.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. So there's a comment from one of our participants here, from Mr. Ng. He said that reporting is to inform the situation. What is more important is what actions will be taken to reduce the emissions, such as moving into more renewable energy, such also like changing to EV buses, solar panels installation, reduce usage of electricity, and maybe timer to switch off aircon in classrooms automatically.
Yeah, and I do agree, because I think in one of my slides I mentioned about you cannot manage what you cannot measure, and I stick to that, because eventually when you wanted to suggest what kind of intervention that can be carried out, you have to be backed by evidence, right? You need to tell, okay, this is the current scenario, and if let's say transition to EV buses would actually help to bring a big chunk of the emissions from transport near zero, then how much of the cost is incurred? So these are the key informations that are needed to report to the decision makers at the end of the day. And the decision makers would be able to tell, like, is it something that worth investing? Or what kind of other options that we have? Or should we prioritize the shifting of EV buses, for example? Or maybe we should consider, let's say, trams instead. So these are the kind of things that we usually put into discussions. Like, what kind of options do we have? And what do we want to recommend to the top management at the end of the day? Because that will be what they want to hear, basically, at the end of the day, right?
So we have several more questions here. I feel like everyone is very excited and wanting to know more about the topic today. So the next question here that I have is from Miss Hazlina. So she said, "Hi, Dr. Fong. Thanks for the great webinar. She's a fourth year student interning in sustainability and keen on GHG reporting. She have two questions to ask. First, what is the first step you recommend for someone looking to get into this field? And are there emission factors for waste?"
Okay. I'll answer the first question first. So, to start, especially when you are still an undergrad student, I think it's good that maybe you can also reach out to Daniel, actually. to understand what are the pain points, or what are the kind of things that we need to do on a daily basis, like meeting people to understand what kind of data we have, what kind of data we don't have. And we also need to liaise with a lot of people, for example, in the IT department. Like, is there a way that we can actually create a system where all the data input can be centralized? So I also mentioned about how we wanted to ensure all the data are more streamlined, more automated down the road. So these are the kind of things that you would need to do on a daily basis. So this is coming from doing the actual GHG accounting. But if let's say you want to move into, like, let's say a consulting um, role, or maybe for a different kind of entity, then you would also need to understand what are the daily jobs or daily tasks needed for those kind of entity. So I think it will be always good, and especially like nowadays you have LinkedIn, you have all sorts of job streets, related kind of description or job description. You can actually go through that and actually understand, like, are those things that excites you? Would you want to make a career out of those? So you can start there, I think. And down the road, then you can decide, because um the certification that I went to is not cheap. I would say it's not cheap, because it would require at least thousands, right? Nearing 10,000. So before you go into having or getting a certification, in that sense, I think it would be good if, let's say, you can explore around, like I mentioned, are those tasks something that you would be excited to work on a daily basis? So if you are able to live with that and you're happy to do so, then I think it's the next step would actually be to look into all these certification options out there. So on top on the question about waste emission factor, yes, there are emission factors. So waste can be categorized with so many things. There are so many different categories of waste. So you need to know which kind of waste you are referring to, and you can just pin it back towards some globally recognized emission factors from some, like, IPCC report or any sort of globally recognized report for the exact emission factors. Yeah.
Right. So moving on. So we have a second question. We have the next question from Wang Swat Ling. So how do the activities of repurpose plastic packaging waste to other meaningful materials be measured in reducing carbon emission? As this is one of the initiatives that minimize the plastic packaging to the landfill, how to quantify it in terms of carbon emission reduction?
Okay. So if please allow me to break it down according to this way. So what I will do in this kind of scenario is, step one, I need to know what is the baseline. It's actually a very simple way that you can actually dissect this. So first of all, you need to know your boundaries. So when you talk about plastic waste diverted, so what scope are you talking about? Are you talking about one floor, one building, or what? Okay, so that's the scope. You need to define the scope first. So the second step is actually to understand the baseline you want to compare to. So the baseline usually is a year, where you can have a very good understanding of what is the plastic waste generated on average. So meaning that if you don't have this kind of data, maybe you need to start collecting data for at least 1 year, so that you can use it as a baseline. So that's step two. So step three is that after you have intervened through some matters, so it could be maybe some campaigns, or maybe some better rationalization activity where you can reduce the plastic waste, then you can actually do a very quick before and after comparison. And that difference, that delta, is actually the amount of waste diverted away from landfill in terms of plastic. And then you can just multiply it using some very simple emission factor, because weight multiplied by emission factor, that would actually give you the CO2 equivalent of the emissions diverted away from a simple plastic waste reduction activity. So that's basically the gist of the idea of how you wanted to do this kind of comparison and quantification. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So next one is from Shahira. So we have she's asking, are there any ongoing projects, research initiatives, or opportunities within UM or UMSDC where students can contribute and gain hands-on experience?
Yeah, right in. Right into to us lah, and because it's an ongoing activity. Like I said, we are still learning, although we have been into this space for 2 to 3 years. But we are still working very hard to understand or have a more holistic understanding of all the activities within UM. We have 500 buildings. We have even more cars and assets that might contribute towards scope 1 emission. Scope 2 is very straightforward. And we have not started with scope 3 as well. So if there are any takers interested in GHG accounting practices, or you just want to get your some experience into this, I think you can just write into us, and I'm happy to discuss further how we can have you on board to help us do this. So yeah, write
Right.
into us. Yeah.
The doors to UMSDC is always open to everyone, right, out there.
Yes. Yes.
And we welcome
Yes.
everyone if you want to help us in moving forward with the sustainability agenda here. So next one is from Puan Melissa. So her question, she's a UM science officer and she's currently doing a PhD focusing on CO2 equivalent quantification. So she's asking, where would be the best place for her to start if she wants to get involved with UM's climate initiatives?
UM's climate initiative.
Yeah.
Oh, UMSTC lah.
Ya, masih silang kan.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the same question
Uh,
just now, lebih kurang je lah.
Yeah.
So again,
Maybe I can add a little bit. So you see, the one that are directly working on UM climate initiative, especially when it comes to carbon neutrality and net zero, that's an initiative led by UMSDC. But there's also another entity. It's called as the Climate Change Advisory Panel. So the Climate Change Advisory Panel is actually from UM, directly supporting the NRES Ministry on climate change related matters, especially when it comes to COP, Conference of Parties. So this is the biggest climate change conference yearly, organized by United Nations, F FCCC. I forgot FCCC is what, but UNFCCC like. It's the highest level of climate dialogues involving all the countries from the United Nations. So we have a dedicated climate change advisory panel for the ministry. So that's also another separate platform that you can engage, which I'm also in that climate change advisory panel. So there are two entities that you can actually reach out to.
all right. So next question from Puan Ribah. So her question is, for someone early in their career, would you recommend starting in sustainability consulting or assurance or an in-house corporate sustainability team? What are the advantages of each path?
To be honest, I don't know. I'm not in that field or in that kind of environment. I'm in academia. So to me, and from what I observe, especially through a very quick search online in the increasing in demands for this specific skill set, so it's quite clear to me that there are demand. So I think regardless whether you wanted to start as an individual or to build an in-house, maybe I really can't tell, but I think it's good that we just proceed first, and wherever the opportunity shows up more, then that could be like the catalyst towards your next chapter. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. Okay, I think we have one more room lah for one last question from Puan
Yeah.
Nur Aisha.
Sure.
So she's asking about, can you give some example of how the report was able to influence the management on their policy or budget decision?
Oh, okay. That's easy.
Mm.
So for example, so when we tell that Basla, for example. So previously, we have been operating on petrol, fossil fuel Basla, basically. So those are running on diesels. So a quick way to divert away is actually to move into EV buses. So the decision here is that are we able to buy EV buses? Because the purchasing of EV buses is very expensive. So then the next step is actually, is there other way to move about this? So then we started to rent buses to operate inside UM. So then we opt for EV buses. So even though if like let's say we wanted to so from a reporting perspective, anything that is owned or owned like basically by UM goes under scope 1, right? But if we source it out, let's say we get the services of bus as a transport in UM, so eventually the emissions would be diverted away from UM to the operation company. They would need to find a way to offset those emissions. So they can choose to purchase the EV vehicles, the EV buses, and rent it to UM. So eventually that's a win-win situation. And from a perspective of maintenance operation, renting makes so much more sense. And we also tackle the emission problem from this switch to EV buses. So that's one example. So many different types of intervention that we wanted to reduce the emission. For example, like we are looking into district cooling system because it's much more energy efficient to manage a district cooling system compared to having individual air conditioning. Because individual air conditioning would also have leakage, fugitive emissions, and there's a lot of cost behind maintenance of all these individual units. So a district cooling system makes sense in that sense. So yeah, so these are some of the examples of how the emission report helps to back the interventions that we propose to top management, and then the top management will decide, okay, let's go with this option, and we can allocate a big portion of, not to say a big portion, but I mean allocate a budget for the implementation of intervention ABC, for example. Yeah.
Right. I think that wraps up for today's session here. So thank you to everyone for being very engaging and asking those questions. So due to our tight schedule, so we have to end our session here. So on behalf of UMSDC, I would like to express our deepest appreciation to technologist Dr. Fong for sharing not only his expertise, but also his personal journey and his genuine passion for this field. So thank you for your time, your generosity, and for making this topic feel so accessible and relevant to us all. So to all of our participants, thank you for being here, for your engagement, your questions, and your curiosity. We hope this session the confidence to take the next step wherever it may lead you. So final reminders, recording from today's session will be shared through email. And if you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to us. You can contact me through through email that I've shared in the Google form. And also, you can contact me through to WhatsApp. Do look out for future programs and events from your SDC. We have more exciting sessions in the pipeline. So for UM staff, the attendance link has been shared in the comment section. So please take note of that and can be scanned through this QR code here. So this form will be used for CPD points, claims purposes. Once again, thank you all for so very much. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much. Take care, stay curious, and we hope to see you again soon. This is Daniel signing off. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.